community. But it's definitely much less than the enrollment that we were seeing when we would actually come together in the studio. And in terms of how I'm working with the dancers, we're kind of trying to get creative right now. I've kind of created a fun movement score for them to do at home in their own time. And basically I spelled out the word quarantine, and I gave them the task for each letter, and they're going to each create a 1-minute solo that we're going to start posting on Facebook. So that they're generating material. It's a little tricky right now because the next project that we were working on is actually a project that we're hoping, we'll see how things go, but we're hoping will premiere in 2021. And it is a project working with individuals who are blind and visually impaired. So that project obviously was requiring us to be absolutely sharing space and working with movement mentor models and developing those, which was something that we were supposed to start straight after the March show. So that's kind of on hold, and we'll just have to be adaptable to what really our community needs right now and how we can continue to be a part of that.
Wow. Definitely sounds like some amazing things going on and everything. Looks like Marco dropped off the call, so I have to email him and see if I can't get him back on. But it sounds like that's definitely what's going on. I do, if you could bring in Hassan as well. Hassan is a local poet, and like I said, hopefully Marco will call us back and everything. But if you can bring Hassan in. Hassan, you're hearing how people are doing it with what's going on in the dance world and definitely with the school world. You were actually are you still in college? I know that when I first met you, you were doing the stand-up thing outside of college. So are you still doing things in college, or are you outside of the area now?
No. So can you hear me first?
I can hear you.
All right, bet. So I have 3 more projects before I'm done with this semester, but I'm still in my senior year as far as college. I was still, so when the virus hit, it hit. So I'm a poet, I'm an artist, I'm a writer in the community, out the community. I do a lot of things around North Carolina and Charlotte and Durham and Raleigh, but for the most part, I kind of operate in Greenberg because I go to North Carolina A&T State. So when the virus hit, it hit at a period where I was transitioning from, because I was the president of my poetry club that I had started on campus. I was transitioning from, like, we were doing practices every day, pretty much 5 days a week. I was trying to establish different things as far as trying to make an after-school program for us to work with at a high school across the town. I was just doing a whole bunch of things as far as paperwork, as far as legwork, as far as organization building, and as far as like editing, the editing process with poetry, the writing process with poetry. But we were shifting into just performances and shows. Like I pretty much like I feel we were told to go home March 12th. If I'm not mistaken, Bull City Poetry Slam would have been that next Saturday, and pretty much from that point on, I would have had a show either by myself or with my poetry club pretty much every weekend and every week till the end of April, pretty much. So when the virus hit, it wiped out everything that we were planning, everything that everybody else was planning. Like, I wasn't necessarily special because it's like when I started talking to other people outside my community, even people like Josephus, you feel me, everybody was reporting pretty much the same type of losses as far as the season that they were going into before all of this happened. So the virus hit the whole artist community pretty hard, for real.
Yep. Definitely, and I do see Marco has joined us back. Definitely stay on because I definitely want to continue this conversation, even learning how some of the things that you're doing. But I did want to bring Marco in as well. So, Marco, I'm sorry that you dropped, but you're back and everything. You're hearing some of these amazing artists that are talking, and Mike Lee with our Durham School Board. But you've actually wrote a book called Primitive, and you've actually talked about the success of entrepreneurs. And I'm imagining that some of those instincts that you feel that people have to have in order to be a success are some of the same instincts that you're seeing people launch into in this new era that we're in, because they're having to use that primitive aspect of what you talk about, because you're talking about what it takes to be a successful person just in general, that you, when you did your book, you learned that what made entrepreneurs successful was that they had remarkable instincts and they trusted them, and they had a intuitive grasp of when to ignore convention. So definitely, we know our artists definitely oftentimes ignore convention. So I think of artists and creatives as being total entrepreneurs on a regular basis, whether they consider themselves entrepreneurs or not. But tell us a little bit about the book, and also you've been listening for a while. I know you dropped for a second, but for the most part, you've heard quite a bit of what both Mike has talked about, as well as some of our two artists, Hassan and Shali. But just tell us a little bit about the book and also about what you're hearing and how that plays into the book.
Absolutely. Well, it's great being on the show and an honor to listen to your very bright and interesting and vibrant guests. I mean, I guess I'll pick up on something that Mike said, which is his kids, maybe not the seventh grader because it ain't cool anymore, but the instinct to hug, the instinct to want that human contact. And I'm at a point right now where I'm kind of zoomed out, to be honest with you, and I'm craving that contact. I was on the phone with a client earlier today who happens to be a modern Orthodox rabbi in Queens, and he's literally lost multiple members of his synagogue to COVID-19. And he was just, in a heartbroken way, he was lamenting the fact that we're living in a world right now that's unprecedented, that we can't hug one another. And I think in a way it relates to a book that I wrote that came out in the height of the COVID-19 epidemic on April 14th. By coincidence, it was my birthday. I work with a big publisher, Hachette. The book is called, as you said, Mark, it's called Primitive, and I'm reclaiming a loaded word, and I can talk more about that and why I did it. But again, primitive, tapping the primal drive that powers the world's most successful people. We conducted over 60 interviews. I shared a lot of my work as someone that's worked in the marketing and PR world for most of my career. So working with Fortune 500 CEOs, working with founders of tech unicorns, working with crazy scientists and sometimes some crazy artists. And when I say crazy, I mean it in the good sense of the word. So for me, we all know those that are about process and those who cross their T's and dot their I's and are more conventional. But as you said, Mark, earlier, the people that are really break out and make an impact and get written about in their obituaries are often those people who are free spirits and who march to their own drummer. And what my book is essentially about is a little bit career, a little bit business, a little bit self-help with some memoir sprinkled in, giving permission for people to do their own thing, whether that's putting out a shingle and being an entrepreneur, whether that's continuing their life as an artist and a creator, or whether that's someone in a corporation who wants to make what I call primitive moves. And I'll just finish by saying, welcome your comments on this. I kind of throw it back to what our ancient ancestors did tens of thousands of years ago and go roaming. And for me, roaming is an acronym, and it stands for being relentless. And it doesn't just mean working hard, because we all know people that work hard but go in circles and don't go anywhere. O for me is oppositional, having the courage to say, I disagree, and hopefully do it in a way that doesn't get you fired. A is agnostic, and, that means what we're hearing on this show, a lot of people that have Renaissance souls that jump from field to field. I'll finish real quickly, and then I'll shut up. I'm a PR guy, so sometimes I talk too much, so I beg your forgiveness. M is messianic, not just a passion, but our divine calling for what we do professionally. I, which is a little counterintuitive, is insecure. A lot of people walk around with bravado and it's all good, and it is what it is. But I don't know about you guys, but I found a lot of super successful people aren't necessarily believers in that it's all good. Sometimes they're paranoid. Sometimes they question their own abilities, and they weaponize those insecurities and only makes them better. And the last two, N is for nuts. I think you all can attest to the fact that sometimes being offbeat and eccentric and spontaneous and impulsive can create amazing things in life. And G is for gallant, giving back to the others. So that's my pitch. I'm a 56-year-old guy who became an author. It's never too late, and you're never too young.
Definitely, and Chalet, you probably can relate to that, not being quite at that age range, but definitely still having the dance thing. And I know some of your dancers are much younger than you and everything, but just along those lines, when I think of dance and things being reclaimed, and I, of course, was friends with the late Baba Chuck Davis, it seems to me that community is one that, in my mind, has always reclaimed that kind of primitive aspect. And I was just wondering if that's your thoughts as well, because when I think of dance, I think of a lot of the dances that you are familiar with, which is like the Irish dances and the Native American dances, and even the African and African American dance culture. So it just seems to me that that's definitely a culture that kind of reclaims the kind of thought that Marco was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also feel like it's constantly changing to kind of be a part of the times, the current times, but it's always going to have its roots where it was people coming together as a community. And one of the things that, I feel zoomed out as well. I have meetings on Zoom all the time now. It's a completely different mindset. It kind of feels like it also changes your mentality. It changes some kind of, brain chemistry to be staring at a computer rather than, sharing space with people. And there's so much in between people, so much information that's shared in a nonverbal way. And that's part of dance's language, So I think there's this push and pull of trying to deal with how to stay relevant in a time where things become compressed into a screen, but also how to allow an art form to still exist. Even though we're streaming virtually the performance, just so we can still allow our audiences to see it, and hopefully it will allow us to broaden our audience. The truth is the entire piece was made for a live audience, and there's an interaction that happens there, and it's almost like being energetically fed when you're in the presence of others. So that's kind of something that I think will never change about dance. But dance has always found a way to continually revolutionize itself too, through periods of time, so that it's still about people, it's still about the moment, it's still about contemporary culture.
Yeah, definitely. And I would argue the same thing, Hassan, about the spoken word community, because like I said, I know that, like you mentioned, the Bull City Slam team, that's very much of a audience-based kind of thing. The audience is over there judging you poets in that kind of competitive poetry scene. So how have you adjusted to doing poetry without having that audience in the background? Because I know you're definitely, when I've seen you perform, you definitely play off the energy, being a younger poet, off the energy that you get from the audience. So, I mean, I know that some of the more seasoned veterans, they can either take the audience or leave the audience, but definitely I find that you young poets are even more engaged with the audience, just because that's kind of the way that y'all were developing your art form. You kind of came into it in that way, in my mind. So just was curious as to your own takes on how you're adjusting to performing in this new era, and if you're even doing any performances. I don't know, are you doing any online performances, or has your poetry group started doing anything virtually?
So I would say that this art form has been resilient, and the culture has been resilient and very quick to adjust. And so I was almost surprised, low key. And you're right, like, especially the way I train the people that, or the way I train my peers, or the way I mentor them, and the way I've trained myself. You feel me? Like, the audience, like, it's for them. It's not like your poem it's for you. Like, you write it for you, but in that moment when you get on stage, you feel me? Your job is to literally grab as many people as you can. And we train the audience, you feel me, that we need feedback, that we need that interaction. So, this is an energy-based art. And so watching this entire shift has shown me that that's true, but also that energy can be given in different ways. So I was in to another point. Well, no, I'm gonna do it this way. So I was in one of my OGs. He's throwing his show, the Heart Gallery. He's throwing it at 6 p.m. on his live. That's Heavy Energy University, I think, on Instagram. But every Saturday at 6, he's been doing it. and to watch how he interacts with the crowd, watch how he